Welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn. Thanks for following a questionable trail of memes to this point. I'm very excited to introduce to you Sam Knowles. Sam has over 30 years experience in helping people and large organisations communicate, especially when it comes to data and storytelling. So his love of words and background in classics have combined with his expertise in experimental psychology. So I'm hoping it's going to appeal to all aspects of our team here at Mavens. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sam Knowles.
Thanks for having me. Friday the 13th, nothing strange happening in the world at the moment. I've called this At Worst You'll Be Interesting because that was what Andy Porteous said to me. Andy and I first worked together 15 years or so ago. And so he said, at worst you'll be interesting. So hopefully, that's the low bar that we have on Friday the 13th. I want to talk to you about analytics and story and bringing analytics and story together, why they've been kept apart, how they're kept apart, how to bring them together, and why that matters. And I'm giving you this, there's no big reveal, but this analytics plus storytelling equals influence is my fundamental equation for what I believe gets success in the modern knowledge economy, and you're clearly very much part of that as a business. There will be 2 mentions of the C word in this session. This comes from Asterix. I don't know if you've seen this on social. Asterix, Asterix and the Roman Charioteer, a 2017 book. Coronavirus is a charioteer who doesn't succeed. The Gauls managed to get coronavirus in the end. I am a buccaneer, as you can tell. I come from Lewes, East Sussex, and every bonfire night, strange things happen in this small liberal town. Lewes, is one of those places like Totnes. It has its own currency. It has a lot of independent craft shops. Waitrose is currently rationing not toilet paper, but cave-aged Gruyere. So I put this up so you can throw mental rotten tomatoes at me, and just so I can tell you a little bit about how I've come to where I am, and how I don't recommend that you follow the same path. So I was, as you say, originally a classicist. I did Latin, Greek and ancient history and then a degree in classics because I was really badly taught maths at school. In a grammar school in Aylesbury, I was in the 5th out of 6 O-level sets, I am that old, and there were more animal noises and algebra going on in that class. I scraped my maths O-level, but I went straight into storytelling that one can get from classics, and that was my first degree. I worked for about a dozen years in consumer and corporate PR, and then around 1988, 89, I got what was known at the time as PMT, or pre-millennial tension. There had to be more to life than just, with all due respect to Unilever, 11 variants of Flora Margarine that I was working on at the time, and Barbie. So I went to a vocational psychologist, and she said, oh, you're really interested in psychology. You should retrain in psychology. I'm quite literal sometimes, so I found the 3 courses that would be good for me to do. One was in Durham, one was in Bristol, and one was 4 miles up the cycle path in Sussex. So I applied, I taught myself the first year's degree, the first year's paper, I sat the first year's paper, I got in, and having given up a 6-figure salary in a West End agency, I found the first 2 hours of my master's in experimental psychology were a statistics lecture, and my heart sank. But I had brilliant statistics teachers, and I discovered that if I could take Latin and Greek and Sanskrit and tell stories with them, I could do exactly the same with statistics. And I fell in love with psychology, and I carried on, did a doctorate in psychology. I'll show you the cover of my doctoral thesis. It's about alcohol and memory. It has some effects, by the way, in case you were wondering. That's my conclusion. I came back out into the world, worked with lots of other Unilever brands, actually worked with Andy in that context. And then about 2013, I decided that it was time to branch out by myself, and I've been running this little data storytelling consultancy, working with businesses, corporates, brands, and also academics for the last 6 years. Now, let me tell you, I was going to say there is nothing more boring than someone who's written a book. There is one thing more boring than someone's written a book. I have written a book. It is called Narrative by Numbers, and you don't have to buy it. 1, because I know that there's at least 1 copy in this building, because I gave a copy to Andy last time I saw him, and 2, because I'm going to tell you all of the good stuff anyway, apart from maybe some of the jokes. The one thing that's more boring than someone who's written one book is somebody who's written the second book and the sequel, How to Be Insightful, Unlocking the Superpower That Drives Innovation. I just sent the page proofs back last week, so there's a lot there. It definitely is a sequel, so if one can mine and understand what the stories are in the data that you're doing all the time, that's, for me, the key to unlocking insights, and there's a very practical framework in there. Enough books, enough buccaneers, but do, come to Lewis on the 5th of November. This is my doctoral thesis, The Effects for Alcohol on Memory for Emotionally Significant Events. Why do we repeatedly binge drink and fail to learn from the experiences? Your taxpayers' money paid for the intelligence in there. Right, I'm going to show you a short film, and in that short film you will see that in my little business we invest nothing in voiceover artists.
The world today is full of numbers, figures, measurements, statistics. All sorts of organisations generating more and more data, day after day and year after year. Businesses, charities, universities and governments. And if you're not careful, numbers can overwhelm you. But it doesn't have to be this way. If you know where to look and what to look for, it's perfectly possible to detect the signal from the noise, harvest it, sort it, and treat it right. Data and statistics can be the foundation stones of storytelling for all different kinds of organisations. Simply and straightforwardly, we can turn it into fuel, rocket fuel, the raw material that can help you engage with the market, customers, investors or colleagues like never before. At the level of the population, and at the level of the individual. To turbocharge the stories that all different kinds of organisations tell, to kickstart the narrative arcs they weave, in the always-on, on-demand world of the 2010s, what everyone needs today is narrative power.
I don't know how Captain Haddock managed to sneak that plug in. I've noticed actually since I've grown this beard to be a buccaneer, I look more and more like the characters on my books. All sorts of organisations, businesses, charities, educational organisations, governments. Nate Silver, some of you I'm sure will know his work and his book, runs the 538 blog, an American now owned by ESPN. He predicted 49 out of 50 congressional districts in the first Obama election correctly, 50 out of 50 in the second, and 0 out of 50 in the first Trump, but he was the least wrong. He says, at the introduction to his book, that the numbers have no way of speaking for themselves. We speak for them. We imbue them with meaning. And I think that's an important sentiment. I'm not the only one who does. Professor David Spiegelholter, so David Spiegelholter, he is Mr. Relative versus Absolute Risk. He runs something in Cambridge called the Winton Centre for Communicating Risk in Uncertainty. I think that's its full name. It's him, a very eminent statistician, and a bunch of experimental psychologists. And what they do is look at how do you communicate risk, and if there's a degree of uncertainty, how do you build that in? He could think, in the introduction to his book last year, The Art of Statistics, of no better thing to say than to quote Nate Silver. So that's what he's doing. The numbers speak for themselves. I don't know if you've seen this going around on flattening the epidemic curve. It's actually cattening the epidemic curve. How do we add meaning to numbers? How do we move from this is what the numbers tell us to therefore this is what we should do as brands, corporates, as organisations? So I encourage you to catten the curve in the coming weeks. Right, 3 things to talk about today. One, the challenge for storytellers. Now I know that not everybody in marketing services and allied businesses likes the word storytellers. Dave Trott in particular hates it in campaign and rails against it regularly. I maintain that actually everyone in this room, to a greater or lesser extent, is a storyteller of some type. You are providing the information, the data, the strategic underpinning that allows more powerful, purposeful stories to be told. I want to talk a little bit about why narrative by numbers, why these things have been kept apart and why they can and should be brought together. And then I'll give you what I believe are 6, they're really simple, by the way, they're really simple golden rules. I could teach you statistics if you wanted me to, but this isn't really a statistics talk, actually not at all a statistics talk with one rule exception. It's far more an expression of empathy and human understanding and appreciation of what the audiences that you're trying to move to action are going to do with the numbers that you generate. Okay, story and storyteller's challenge, the challenge that And if you don't like this, just hold your nose during this section, if you don't like that word. Story and story structure. So from circle time at infant school onwards, story structure is the way that we navigate the world. We know I'm a classicist. The Latin for fireplace is focus. And you focus on the flames around a campfire of the stories that will pour forth. I'm told that some offices thrive on office gossip. I'm sure this isn't one of them, but the dynamics. They've both gone to a conference in Bournemouth, yet the conference was last week. How strange. The box sets that we watch that dominate so much of our lives and maybe dominating our lives rather more in the coming weeks ahead, we don't watch these, we don't indulge in these because we want to be, I mean, this is my favourite, Sopranos. We don't indulge in these because we want to be a New Jersey-based waste management operative like Tony Soprano. But what is it that they can tell us about our lives? And there's a structure, an underlying pattern and structure in all of that that I think can radically simplify and improve, if you're not using it already, the way that you build your presentations, your reports, your feeding back on data, turning that into strategy. That structure, that storytelling structure, very important. This guy down here in the blue jalaba is sitting in the Jama El Fanar in the main square in Marrakesh. I don't know if he's still around because that photograph was taken in about 2000, but every night he would come back at 7 o'clock and tell the next instalment of, I don't know what it was because I have zero Arabic, but Marrakesh EastEnders, and he'd have hundreds of people around him. Story structure, what we really use to navigate the world. Good quote from John le Carré, the cat's out on the mat is not a story. The cat's out on the dog's mat, now that is a story. A story that was told in my very house only a few weeks ago, where my cat Tony Soprano, irritated a visiting dog, and he now has a little hole for an earring in his ear. So there's a story there. Another classical allusion, there's only one more after this, the golden thread. So Theseus, when he went to slay the Minotaur, was given by his girlfriend Ariadne, who he treated very badly afterwards, but that is another story. He was given this ball of golden thread that he could weave through the labyrinth under the palace in Knossos in Crete, kill the Minotaur and find his way out again. The golden thread. My doctoral supervisor was Greek, and she always talked about the importance of having this golden thread. And this is not about telling the same story again and again. It's not necessarily about forcing you to have internal consistency, but this golden thread off which everything can hang. The story of a brand, the story of a campaign. Last classical bit, promise. This guy behind me is Aristotle. Aristotle wrote a very simple, very short, very readable, particularly in translation, book called The Poetics in the 4th century BC. And in that book, he was talking about the 3 forms of art that there were. There was comedy, tragedy, and epic poetry. And he observed that there was this 3-act structure. Now, this 3-act structure, where you have a setup, a confrontation, a resolution, is what Hollywood screenwriters and script writers use today. It's what novelists use. It's what short story writers use. It's what creators of really impactful business presentations will use. This is sometimes called the inciting incident in film critiques. And you need to kind of come back to the world that you started in a new way. Setup, confrontation, resolution. He called it thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Aristotle, the past, the present, the future. How do we get here? What's the status quo? Where are we going? It's a really strong structure, and I'm sure it's in all of your presentations already. But if there's a bit of it that's missing, then it's really unsatisfying for your audience, and they want, why on earth did you set out on this quest? What was the insight? What got you motivated to go on this? Dan Pink, the American business writer, great communicator, he says that we are all in the moving business, the business of moving and persuading other people to take action. Very good writer, very good book, very simple synthesis of a lot of social and cognitive psychology he usually has. Of course, there's a however, or I say there are 4 howevers in a bigger and bigger data world. And those 4 howevers are these. One is that there is just too much noise. So however brilliant the work is that you're doing on behalf of your clients, they may be spending 5% of their time looking at and paying attention to what you're telling them. There's this phenomenon of continuous partial attention, which you will be personally familiar with if you have children or nephews and nieces in their teens, you'll be very familiar with continuous partial attention. They always say it's a benefit rather than it's a fleetness of foot and fleetness of mind. And anyway, don't we live in a fake news, post-truth world? Does data, does veracity really matter? And then, of course, in the world of commercial communication, we now live in this world that the consumer has very much more power and can decide to curate their own content, not just in social, but in terms of what they receive in terms of advertising messages too. So to cut through, those are big, I think, 4 big challenges. Here's a horrid slide, sort of sick on a page slide. How are we going to manage to get our golden thread story to work all the way through all of these different channels and platforms? Clearly we're not, but what choices do we make? I wish this were my phrase, from Gutenberg to Zuckerberg, from the invention of the printing press in the late 15th century until the end of 2013, we had created enough data that would fill 32 gigabit iPads stretching to the moon. And by the end of 2014, we'd got the same coming back again. This is the growth and scale of data, as you well know, is kind of beyond asymptotic. It's kind of doing loop the loops. It's growing so fast. Here's one of my clients only last week. Morris, so that's the first thing. There's a lot of this stuff about, and you need to find and use relevant data. And maybe that's a statement of the bleeding obvious, but sometimes statements of the bleeding obvious can be insightful. The second is this thing, continuous partial attention. So Morris Sarchi, in 2006, Cannes Lions, said, how can a teenager in the 30 seconds of a TV commercial, notice that's obviously his yardstick for measuring, how can they take a call, send a text, receive a photo, play a game, do all of these things? They call it CPA, or continuous partial attention. Think about, obviously when you're building a message, building a story, want people to read something, want people to watch a film, want people to engage with the content that you're giving them, beware that they are likely to suffer from continuous partial attention. So how do you use data and statistics, not necessarily front and center, but as a strong underpinning to get people to pay attention? Fake news was the Oxford English Dictionary's word, or I would say it was 2 words of the year in 2016. Post-truth was 2017. Does data even matter anymore? Is data remotely relevant? I think it's more relevant than it ever has been, but the way in which it is used and the tolerance for the audience to pay attention to it maybe has got a lot shorter. And then the final part of this, however, is in these so both in terms of social, but also obviously in terms of subscription video on demand services like Netflix, Disney Plus and so on, like Spotify and Apple Music, like ad blockers, what are they, 20, 30, 40% depending on the market that you're in now. Commercial communication is having to work even harder because we're taking back control, if you'll excuse that phrase. It will come up later. This is an article from the Harvard Business Review from the beginning of last year, this time last year. Scott Bernato, the author, says, and this is, I think, a really interesting thing, this last mile problem. How much time do you spend working on the data in order to get the insights, in order to tell the story? Efforts fall short in the last mile when it comes time to explain the stuff, the so what, now what does it mean, what should we do with it? Efforts fall short in the last mile when it comes time to explain the stuff to decision makers. He's got some suggestions and some strategies. Very good article, worth reading. But I think that last mile problem, how do we go from this is what it means to this is what we should do as a result? Okay, part 1. All good so far? Any questions? We'll go on. Okay, why narrative by numbers? So I think there are 2 reasons, there are 2 things that have happened that have led to the division of analysts and storytellers. The first is a problem with education. Not a problem with educating Greater Manchester. I was in Manchester 2 days ago. No, yesterday, in fact, with this very slide. It was quite a thrill to be in the city this comes from. My 16-year-old son won't allow us to watch Educating Greater Manchester. He says, would you want to watch a documentary about being in your office all day, Dad? No, thanks. But no, the problem with education is that we are separated. We are separated to be artists and scientists. I see he may or may not be taking GCSEs, who knows what's happening in the world this year. He's doing lots of mocks and lots of revision at the moment, and he's already even 2 years ago he specialised to make some choices. He's already made his A-level choices, they will specialise. That will dictate the degree. And education naturally forces us to go one way or another. It's inevitable. Lots and lots of institutions will have major and minor subjects. Tertiary education will have major and minor subjects. But what gets most of the marks? What is the degree really in? Is it in beekeeping or is it in American literature? It's probably more American literature than it is beekeeping. So it's a problem with education that we are forced apart. I think there's a second problem. That's a problem with psychology. And I can be rude about PR people because I was one. I can be rude about psychologists because I was one. Actually, this is not so much a problem with psychology per se, and more the misinterpretation, the willful oversimplification, misinterpretation of the popular media that says we're left-brained or right-brained. I work with a business that describes themselves as the left-brained advisor to the CMO, which I think is interesting as a proposition, but it doesn't stand much neuroscience. The left, there's a bit of the brain here that can understand the meaning of individual words. And if you just advise the left brain, and you don't advise the right brain, which is able to join them together and turn them into context and syntax and meaning and structure, then you're lost. Now, the fact that I'm standing here, no one's left so far in disgust. People might be thinking, is there going to be an end to this sentence? But I'm making, I hope, sense. There's about 150 things happening on both sides of the brain, all joined together with a bundle of fibres in the middle. To talk about people being left-brained or right-brained, which often happens, people who follow STEM subjects become left-brained and art subjects become right-brained. To talk about them being left-brained or right-brained is a gross oversimplification. Yes, there are a very few neuroscientific patients who have only one hemisphere or only one works, or some that have them severed. But to talk about left brain or right brain is a fundamental misinterpretation. And I think that those two problems, both psychology and education, are a challenge, because the two skills that really matter in the modern knowledge economy, that you, I have no doubt, have in abundance in you, are the ability to look at and make sense of and interpret data. Now, you don't have to be a ninja statistician to do that. It might be pictorial data, it might be verbal data. You'll have tools that help you to do that, to look at and make sense of the data. I co-founded and co-host a podcast called the Small Data Forum. And we say that we look at the uses and abuses of data, big and small, in politics, business and public life. We were recording an episode this morning before I came up to town, and I think it's really interesting that sometimes people will have really powerful tools on their desktop. They might be Brandwatch or Hootsuite or Tableau or whatever it might be, and they will take a screenshot and say, look, there's the insight. That's what we should. How can that possibly be the insight? That isn't the insight. There was a report that was in PR Week last week that was talking about the absolute necessity and the best practice of absolutely augmented intelligence, artificial intelligence, tools that can cut down on the amount of time that humans are having to go through stuff, but actually we really do need to apply that human learning and understanding, and then make that the foundation of our storytelling. So the two skills, analytics and storytelling. Two reasons why this matter. One is the kind of the bigness of big data, the iPad stretching to and from the moon, bouncing up probably as far as Venus these days. The second is that many, many more voices matter. When I started in corporate and brand communication in 1989, there was a single route that went, and a single person, often wearing a suit, almost always male, who would be talking on behalf of the company. Now, you can all go to, well, you can't all go to any industry events because they've all been cancelled, I've seen. But when they come back, you can go to events and you can perfectly happily tweet and write blogs, and your bio may well say, I work at Mavens of London, but the views are all my own. But if I find them and I'm interested in what you say, and you've started a thread that started a conversation among you and your clients and colleagues and others at the conference, my opinion, my material opinion of this organisation will be shifted in a positive or negative way if I agree or disagree with you. You may change the way that I think about things. So many, many more voices matter. And so no great drum roll because it was on the first slide, but I do believe, for all of these reasons, that this universal equation of impact is, if you can do the analytics bit, you can join it with the storytelling bit. You don't need to be ninja at both, but they are two fundamental human skills that we have. You are more likely to be influential. You're more likely to win in that battle in the moving business. You're more likely to persuade your clients to buy and buy big and to cross-sell. You're more likely to have campaigns that are more effective and more impactful. Okay, so 6 golden rules, and they really, well, they start simple and they get a bit more complicated. But the first one, keep it simple. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician, Mark Twain, Winston Churchill, and Oscar Wilde went into a room. Not a joke at all. They are all said to have said, and they may well have been quoting each other, I would have written you a shorter letter, I just didn't have the time. I would have produced you a smaller spreadsheet or a shorter slide deck rather than the 164 slides that I gave you. I just didn't have the time. Simplification really is not a dirty word. I'm not talking about dumbing down. I was with a bunch of academics yesterday and the day before, and there was a lot of nervousness about, but surely you're making it too simple. And there's a big difference between making things easy and making things simple and clear to understand. So I'm encouraging you to make sure that you choose your numbers wisely, that you use a few straightforward numbers. I mean, make your language, particularly if you've got a data-driven story, make your language really simple too. I do quite a lot of writing on behalf of clients, often data-driven writing, and I run all of the words that I run through a linguistic analytics engine because I'm a word nerd and a bit of a data storyteller. And that will tell you how many years of continuous education you would need to have passed through to understand this at first reading. You want to aim for about year 8, year 9, the transition between primary and secondary school. It'll give you a score between 1 and 100. 90 is BuzzFeed and Cosmo Online. 65 is the Daily Mail, 55 the Guardian, 43 the Economist, Apple iTunes terms and conditions 20, and your average insurance document minus 20. It shouldn't go minus, but average insurance minus 20. But think about the language that you use to wrap around the numbers that you create, and then avoid exposition and backstory. So backstory, you know, your favourite film series, book, novelist, whatever it might be, your favourite form of diversion where there is an ongoing narrative. How irritating it is when suddenly a character or a situation is introduced. Sorry, I've just got to tell you this. We've got to go and meet their previous relationships so you can see that this person is a coercive, controlling person. But it's such a backstory. I'll give you an example. And this is if you were saving Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, for this weekend, I'm sorry, there's a spoiler happening here. Okay? How much better is it that at the end of that film, Darth Vader cuts off Luke Skywalker's hands and says, "But Luke, I am your father," than we have to sit through Star Wars Episodes 1, 2 and 3, which is really about a trade war between America and China. Much better not to have that backstory. Think about that in the data that you produce and the data that you share with your clients and that you use as the underpinning for the brilliant campaigns that you want to run on their behalf. So exposition and backstory, not so good. Second one, find and use relevant data. Well, you might think, well, of course, find and use relevant data. Time series data is really, you know, there's a lot. You can do a lot with time series data, but we'll come back to a watch out on that shortly. I put this up because I fundamentally disapprove of word clouds. I hope I'm with friends here. I have a friend who's written a book on data marketing, on social media analytics, and he describes the word cloud as the mullet of social media analytics. Because someone, probably David Hasselhoff, thought it was cool in the 80s and it hasn't been since. It shows you so little. I like that particularly because I had a mullet in the 80s. But think of the data that you're generating, the tools that you're subscribing to, maybe particularly in your new relationship, in your new ownership. That could be very interesting, that you'll have even more data that you want to be putting into the models that are building the stories. And then think of what is publicly available. There's a public data movement. I'll come on to that very shortly. But you know, think about you've got an employee engagement survey and compare it with Glassdoor. What is the difference? I narrowly avoided a job with an American communications agency once when someone said, "Have you seen what they actually do on Glassdoor?" I had never heard of Glassdoor, but I was glad I had after that. But there's a lot of time series data. Weather data. This year is obviously going to be different, but I've done a lot of work with, they call themselves the sheds, the DIY superstores, the Wixes and the B&Qs and so on of this world. For them, in a normal year, weather data and accurate predictive weather data is the single most important factor in their models that they build for what they're going to stock for the 5 crucial bank holidays that are about to come up between now and the end of May. Because if they know it's going to be hot in a normal year, and they can buy outdoor paint and decking and barbecues and barbecue briquettes en masse, fantastic. And if they get that wrong, then they're left with loads of stuff they can't sell, and has probably been rained on outside. So lots and lots of different types of data available. I mentioned this Small Data Forum podcast. We often talk about the corner of little big data, and we like to squash the letters of big data down and put them in their places on nouns. So identify the corner of little big data. I encourage you to, I'm sure you know Simon Sinek's to start with why, Mr. Behind Purpose. Start with why with the data sets that you're looking at. Start with why to think, what are the questions that we're asking? What are the hypotheses? Not that we're trying to prove, what are we trying to test? You know, we're not trying to bake this and come up with the answer. What are we trying to find out? Ask the right questions of data. Now, I'm going to show you public education film now from the British Heart Foundation, which you may well remember. There's a single, well actually there's more than a single data point, but there's a data point in here which if you find one of these in the next 6 months, then you'll be popping the champagne corks. So I'm going to show you this, and I like it for so many reasons.
My name is Vinnie Jones, and I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget. There are times in life when being tough comes in handy. Say some geezer collapses in front of you. What do? You need a volunteer named breathing. This one I made earlier. First thing you do is you check him over. If he ain't responsive or ain't breathing, or he's making noises like this, then his heart stop working, he's having a cardiac arrest. Look lively. First call 999, then you do hands-only CPR, and no kissing. You only kiss your missus on the lips. Watch, lock your fingers together, knuckles up, then push down, right on the socket. Push down 5 or 6 centimetres, that's about 2 inches in old money. Push hard and fast, about 2 times a second, right to the beat staying alive. Worried you'll hurt him? Better a cracked rib than him kicking the bucket. Keep this up till the ambulance arrives. So don't forget, check him over. 999, push hard and fast to staying alive. It works. Hands only CPR. It ain't as hard as it looks. If you want to come in handy in an emergency, why not sign up for one of our heart start courses?
So what BHF wanted to do, I've got a cardiologist friend who says if you have a heart attack outside of, particularly on the street, and you're left for a while and you have a heart attack and you're outside of the cardiac ward, your chances of survival aren't brilliant, but it's better that more people should know. So the key metric here was not how many people have been saved by citizen kind of Vinnie Jones clones, it's what do people know about what they need to do. And it went absolutely through the roof as a result of this campaign. But in terms of an emotional story there, an emotional human story, we've got this former footballer who's been in several B movies, Guy Ritchie movies, as a hood. He's got some presence. I think he has love and love on his knuckles there. I'm not sure, but I think he has love and love on his knuckles. But he's playing this character. He's playing his gangland character in his long raincoat. What makes it, I think, so memorable is the fact that you've got the Bee Gees' 80s disco classic of Staying Alive, which just happens to be the most brilliant bit of data storytelling here, because as he tells us, that is the beat that you need to be pumping to. There's other things there. I mean, in Vinnie's world, of course, that fictional world he's inhabiting, apart from his brilliant 2 hoods dancing at the back, which I think are priceless, everyone wears a medallion. So push down on the sovereign. So we kind of know, you can imagine where most medallions will. That's where the heart is. The other thing I love is that he's appealing to a mass audience here. Push down 5 or 6 centimetres. That's 2 inches in old money. You know, he's appealing to the audience, the older and the younger audience. Brilliant piece of data-driven storytelling. So well done, the planners on that campaign. Won lots and lots of awards. But that one piece of data, that one killer statistic of the 110 to 120 beats a minute, that's what you need to do. Fantastic. We can make this piece of emotional storytelling that's going to stick in people's minds. I didn't know, in fact, the other thing, I've not been on one of their Heart Start courses. I do now know what to do. I had no idea that you had to crack a rib. But, you know, in his gangland way, his East End way, better a cracked rib than he kicks the bucket. Lots of information there. Great public health educator. Well done, Vinnie. Right. False positives. So this is about as statistical as it gets. I'm sure there's no stats fear in this room. Avoid false positives. There is a Harvard law student called Tyler Vegan. And Tyler Vegan, I'm sure his parents were really proud when he went to Harvard Law 10 years ago. He hasn't graduated yet because he's become obsessed with spurious correlations. And if you know, or even if you don't know, I reckon quite a lot of people in this room are going to get lost in this website this afternoon. Spuriouscorrelations.com has 30,000 spurious correlations. Here's a few. Number of sociology doctorates awarded correlating with worldwide non-commercial space launches. It's about a correlation coefficient of 0.75, but it's amazing how when one goes up, the other goes down. He likes dairy. He really likes dairy. So per capita cheese consumption, the people that get tangled in their med sheets, right? You have cheese, it gives you bad dreams, you get tangled, you die, okay? Of course it does. Time series data, publicly available data sets. I love this one. Maine, liberal but quite quite state. The caregiver, let's call her the wife, realises she's more likely to stay married if she serves butter rather than margarine. I almost apologise for putting this up here. I'm going to tell an apocryphal and probably untrue story. Andy will be able to probably say whether this is an untrue story, about ice cream sandwiches and about Unilever's attempts to use its Ben & Jerry's ice cream sandwiches. So I have been told, why would we not love ice cream sandwiches in this country, right? We like biscuits, we like chocolate, we like ice cream. We can put them in the same bowl and we seem to be quite happy, but we don't like ice cream sandwiches. So I'm told that, Unilever bought Ben & Jerry's in about 2000. They'd made 2 previous attempts to take their son of a witch ice cream sandwich product to market. First time, the chilled distribution network wasn't good enough, so there were too many fridges broke down in the corner shops. Second time's terrible summer. Third time, a few years ago, the marketing director was told, we want to do ice cream sandwiches again. We've got long-term weather forecast, nicked that from the DIY people, got that, know that, it's going to be a great summer. Can you please launch them and make it a great success? And she said, yes, of course I can do this. Can I have an advertising budget? And they said, no, but you can hire a social media agency and a marketing manager. Do that. And then towards the end of, so that happens and great things happen. Towards the end of July, beginning of August, the bumptious young marketing manager comes into his boss's office and says, look at this, isn't this fantastic? The yellow is sales. Look at our sales. It wasn't so much at the beginning of the year, but look at what's happened to sales. Sales have gone great. Instagram people are posting pictures of them eating in St James's Park, all over the Trafford Centre in Manchester. People are eating these products. And Twitter, do you remember when Graham Norton broke the BBC's charter by eating one of these at the beginning of his show in 30 seconds and holding up the packaging at the end? Wasn't that fantastic? Can we have some more money, please, for the social media agency? And his boss said no. And he said, that was quick, boss. Any reason why? She said, have you heard of hidden third causes? Do you know about hidden third causes? He said, no, to explain more. I'm feeling disappointed. I got in early to show you this and you brushed it. So she said, what else has happened during the period that you're talking about the sales and the social media posts? And he said, I don't know, I'm not sure. And she got out her highlighter pen and she said, it's got hotter. Funnily enough, that's the kind of thing that happens, that people eat more ice cream and they're with their friends and they share more on social. So no, you can't have any more money for your social media agency, but keep them doing this great job and see if you can get them to break the BBC's charter a few more times. I don't know whether it's apocryphal or not, but it's a yarn. David Spiegelholter, this guy I mentioned, this from Cambridge, even in the era of data science, open data science and data journalism, we still need basic statistical principles in order not to be misled by apparent patterns in numbers. So if you're blending data sources in particular, and if you're taking them from the open data movement, there's plenty of stuff you can take. Just make sure that you're not violating any obvious things like seeing false positives where in fact there's nothing at all. The next one is curse of knowledge, and in fact the last 3 are all more about empathy and human understanding and putting yourself in the mind of those you're looking to influence. As soon as Eve eats the apple, she's unable not to notice that Adam's naked, and she's sniggering slightly there. He's even a little smirk on her lips there. This is the last obligatory picture of POTUS 45, I promise. I'm going to demonstrate the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is, if you know something, and boy do all of you know so much about your clients and their data and what it means, if you know something, it's very hard to put it out of your mind that everybody else doesn't know it as well. So I'm listening to a tune in my head at the moment. It's not a psychopathology, I can hear a tune. I'm going to clap that tune, and I'd like you to tell me what the tune is. And I reckon a lot of you will know this tune. No? Hey Jude by the Beatles, surely you can hear. Okay, there's one tune that I think shows that music can be hardwired into human beings. This works all over the world. Can you just shout out when you know this tune? Thank you very much. So there's the one that does not obey the curse of knowledge. I could hear that being sung, but you could also hear it because it's been hardwired into you. Steve Pinker is the Harvard Professor of Psychology. He's written lots of books about lots of things. This is a lovely book called The Sense of Style, The Thinking Person's Guide to Writing in the 21st Century. And he identifies the 5 biggest offenders in the curse of knowledge. Academics, number one. You know, he's been one for all his life, so he can point the finger. Academics, absolutely number one. Not bringing themselves down to the general publics or even their students or their graduate students or their postdoc researchers, not bringing themselves down. Academics, big pharma, the legal industry. I think he argues that the legal industry is predicated on the curse of knowledge. That's the business model of the legal industry, not explaining it. Financial advisors, and scientists more generally, I think, outside of academia. So beware this curse of knowledge. What you're not required to do is to take us on the journey and to show your workings out. This is not mathematics GCSE. You don't need to show your workings out. What you need to do, so showing your workings out and forcing more and more data onto people is, one, it's kind of not very good manners, but two, cognitive psychology, basic cognitive psychology will say that the more information you throw at people, trying to change their mind in just a rational way, the more they close off and the more they get more entrenched in their position. I read in a psychological paper a couple of months ago, there is something now called the Project Fear phenomenon, that if you throw information in the way that the Remain side did during the EU referendum, people, they just don't want to hear. So, don't do that. Know your audience. Again, not complicated, but this point of empathy and understanding. Who's going to be in the room? Are they going to be tolerant to the amount of data that we want to give? How are we going to capture their attention? How are we going to get them to say, that's really interesting, I don't believe that, or that goes against everything we've ever seen before? How did you come to that? Fantastic. You can then go to your presentation and all of the slides in the appendix and say, well, we did this and this and this, rather than show every single cross-tabulation for every single bit of analysis you've done. About putting yourself into the mindset of those that you're looking to influence. Last film, I think, the third of the fourth of the 4 This Girl Can campaigns. Even if there was no point to show that joyful video, it would cheer up a Friday the 13th. But there is a point. There is indeed a point. Actually, twice when I've shown this in either training or in talks, people have said, come up to me at the end and said, "Did you see me? Did you see me in there?" For me, it's like seeing it's like a sort of celebrity spot, because I've seen this so often. I love this campaign so much. So, the data-driven insight that shows that Sport England understands its audience very well. It's too delicious. They're the same number, but they pull in different directions, 85%. I'll come back to it in a second. The problem that they were facing in 2014 is that there is a gender exercise gap between men and women. Girls aged 14 to 70 versus boys aged 14 to 70. There's about 2 million gender exercise gap, and Sport England wanted to close that. And they looked at what are the drivers of what makes those who do exercise, but particularly what are the drags. And they found these two 85%. One is that of those women who don't do regular sport and exercise, they say it's for fear of being judged. Now, I'm a convert to, you can see body of an athlete, right? I'm a convert to running in the last 9 years. I run I say more for mental, but also for physical health. I plod slowly around the lanes of Sussex, usually under cover of darkness. I completely understand this fear of being judged, or at least I did until I heard this. Actually, most people, I think about 1 in 10, 1 in 9, 1 in 10 people in the country run. Most people don't notice them. They don't even see them. They don't think, oh, your makeup's running, your hair's out of place, you're wearing sweaty lycra. Well, they say that to me anyway. They don't notice that. What they think is, only a very small proportion notice it. Of those who notice it, 85%, just a glorious coincidence with numbers, 85% think that's impressive, I should do that, that's really inspiring. And that's why Sport England used the real women who I sometimes am lucky enough to have in my audience. So they used the real women really exercising. That was the third of the fourth campaigns. They were looking at another drag on participation, which was, it's too expensive, I can't afford going to the gym. So they've got people swimming in the sea, but they've also got the mum on the bars in the kids' playground. They've got the mum hula hooping in her kitchen. And then of course, bookending it, we've got the mum with the pushchair with the kid going around the park. Real women really exercising and inspiring others to take part. And what's happened in the course of the 4 years, we have a sustainable 250,000 increase. That gender exercise gap is closing. One of the reasons it's closing is football, actually, in women's football. But I think it's a really clever example of knowing and understanding your audience. Nearly there. Right, the dialect that is quite rare for people working with numbers to talk is human. This strange dialect. You know, we make our decisions. This is Daniel Kahneman, Mr. Thinking Fast and Slow, cognitive psychology at Princeton, psychologist at Princeton in his late 80s now. Not the world's most readable book, by his own admission. Good book, but not his world. In that, he brings all the evidence together that says we make our decisions emotionally and we justify them rationally. These ancient, evolutionarily ancient bits of the brain that we share with reptiles, birds, and every other mammal. The quick and dirty so-called System 1 processing. The facts, data don't really kind of get here. They get here into the cerebral cortices. They get into the outer bits of the brain that make us uniquely human. We make our decisions emotionally and we justify them rationally. So think about that. Think about how you tell these emotional stories. Spotify is really, really good at this. Here's one of their dear people, dear 3,749 people who streamed It's the End of the World as We Know It on the day of the Brexit. Hang in there. And then, you know, dear person who streamed the Hamilton soundtrack 5,500 times last year, can you get us tickets? Dear 42 people who played Sorry on Valentine's Day on a continuous loop, what did you do wrong? They understand. You know, I'm sure there are many Spotify subscribers in the room. You know, Spotify.me, they send you what you've been listening to over the year, and you can go and look at any time. Apparently, I listen to a lot of AOR dad rock. Who'd have thought, Andy? Who'd have thought? Very strange that. I thought it was much more cutting edge than that. One more thing, and this kind of is also about the EU referendum. And Andy, you were saying that we might want to talk a little bit about this number here. And I've lined up an encore, arrogantly lined up an encore of some more slides about that number, because I'm really interested in this number and how brilliant and clever it is, and ultimately deceitful. But New Scientist editorial, less than a week after the EU referendum. For reason to triumph, they said, scientists need to learn to engage with emotion. For data-driven storytellers to triumph, we need to blend the rational and emotional. You know, Bill Bernbach knew this when he founded DDB. David Ogilvy, when he set up Ogilvy, knew that we needed to blend the rational and the emotional. Ogilvy himself worked for Mori, I think, originally. He was a market researcher. I can't remember her surname now. Faye, the character in the representation of Birth of Planning in Mad Men in season 4. Blonde psychologist, Don Draper of course has an affair with her. She, you know, we are blending rational and emotional. We've been doing it for a long time. We must do more of it. So these are my slogans. Accept that simplification is not a dirty word. Don't think that you're dumbing down or throwing stuff away. If you can explain it simply and elegantly, that's a noble purpose. This last mile problem, so get over this last mile problem. And then the two in the middle, the sort of two in Wolverhampton Wanderers colours. Tell me, so what? What does the data mean? Tell me now what? What should I do as a result? Empathy, absolutely make empathy your superpower, absolute superpower. Talk human, and you know, don't forget that analytics and storytelling really is the key to influence. Right, I'm going to leave you with two quotes. One from a rather good book called Made to Stick, that after a presentation, a very precise 63% of people will remember stories, but only 5 will remember statistics. So remember that when you're thinking, what you want to give is your stories, you want to give them mimetic potential, you want people to share them. When you've gone to see your client, chief marketing officer you've presented to, she bumps into her chief exec at the water cooler. Who was that? Oh, that was Mavens of London. What they said? Oh, they said this, this and this, rather than, I don't know, I was on my phone because there were so many charts. You know, it's too much data, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. The other one is a much more personal one, it is a much warmer one. I don't know if you know Mark Commode, Church of Wittertainment, the high priest of Wittertainment. He has a podcast, he's on 5 Live every week, a brilliant film reviewer. Just in these strange times in which we're living, I want to give you a word of wisdom from him, which is, everything will be all right in the end, and if it isn't all right, it isn't the end. Well, it is.
Thank you so much, Sam. Very interesting. Guys, do you have any questions that anyone would like to ask regarding data storytelling? Any thoughts?
So the bus story. So in the book, that is a really compelling snippet that I've really sort of attached. Can you unpack that a little bit? Why it's so compelling around that number? How it used?
So, as I say, I prepared an encore. Here we are. So, 350 million a week. Is it a good number? Is it a bad number? Or is it a zombie number? Well, it's simple, right? It's simple and it's round and it ends with a 0. And so it's memorable. And it became, you will remember, the defining earworm of the EU referendum. So all of those who were using it as a number after Boris Johnson and Gisela Stewart had stood in front of the bus, all of them were using it, would repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. All of those on the Remain side would go on to, remember when government ministers went on to the Today programme? That was a strange time, wasn't it? They would go on to the Today programme and they said, this 350 million a week number, it's nonsense because it's not, it ignores, and they would say this 3, and then of course every interviewer on every TV and radio station and kind of press person in the briefing would say, so what do you think of 350 million a week? And it just became the one number. If you think of, when I talk about this project fear phenomenon, this in cognitive psychology now, that if you throw lots and lots and lots of data, you bring the Bank of England, you bring the Institute for Fiscal Studies, you bring the British Chamber of Commerce to tell more things that are going to happen, you just entrench people in their views. So it's simple, it's round, it ends in 0. It's rounded up, and it is rounded up, but it's not really suspiciously rounded up. If it was 400 million or half a billion, maybe you could have started to tug at that a bit. But actually what it does is it takes a figure, which is the gross contributions from the UK. The UK used to make, well, makes till the end of this year, to the European Union, of 18 billion a year, and it divides it by 52. So it's big, but it's not too big. It's understandable. I think at the time that it was put on the first bus, there was a Mexican lottery win that was about that size. We cannot work in billions. Most of us don't have billions of pounds ever, let alone millions, but we've got an idea of what millions might be. Billions are hard. There's a charity called National Numeracy, oddly enough based where I live in Lewis, that aims to help everybody become, as they say, numbers people, to increase the levels of numeracy. I read a report that they put out that said that 17% of the UK workforce are data literate. So we've got a really skewed number here, right? But 70%, half of people, if you were to test them now in the workforce, have year 6 or below mathematics. It's half people have end of primary school mathematics. 75% don't get anywhere near GCSE mathematics. So we are not dealing with a very data literate society, but billions are really, really difficult. So it's a weekly amount. It's a weekly amount that we could think. 18 billion is too big. I think 18 billion a week may not have worked at all. I really don't think it would have been. And it's a compound variable. It takes in, obviously it's about gross contributions, but it takes in lots and lots and lots of different bits to be its. It doesn't show its workings out. It doesn't say we did this and we did this and we did this. It just gives you the number. And then it's repeated ad nauseam by both sides and by every reporter, so it becomes the defining earworm, although we'll come back to the attempts to get rid of it. So this is government. This donut is government spending. Excel doesn't do doesn't do really small things. I think it's point of the all of government spending, 735 billion in 2016. 3.7 billion, which was the net spend, it's what statisticians would call a rounding error, right? It's a small amount, and I know that the EU referendum wasn't just about money, but it is very, very small. Of course, then it came out afterwards that figure was actually more like 156 million. But it was a number that wouldn't die. So when there was jeopardy, do you remember there was jeopardy before Johnson was Prime Minister? There was jeopardy. Theresa May was giving a speech in Florence, I think, and he trotted out again. Came out again, undermined her position when he went there. It led to, and I love this, Sir David Norgrove, the head of the UK Statistics Authority, wrote him a letter saying, "Dear Foreign Secretary, I'm surprised and disappointed to see that you've chosen to repeat the figure of 350 million." Got told off by the country's statistician until it just takes on this status of being a zombie statistic. But it's a statistic that has been developed by, obviously, the master of the 3, 4 or 5 letter slogan. Responsible for Europe yes, Europe no, Europe yes, Euro no, responsible for 350 million a week, responsible for take back control, responsible for this JCB here in the election campaign. Our man in the middle there, a very, very brilliant use of data, a person using data in order to develop very powerful emotional stories. On the bus, do you remember this? So, now this was during the election campaign, wasn't it? It was during the election campaign, it was a clever wheeze, wasn't it? Because there was this lie made up, and it is a lie made up that Johnson likes making buses out of cardboard boxes, and it led. I'm glad to say that's now not the case, but it did lead for several months. If you typed Boris Johnson bus, that wasn't on the front page of Google. That was the purpose of this story. So that's my 350 million a week to the NHS. And any more questions I'll happily answer.
It's funny because it seems like a little bit of backstory was needed to sort of explicate that figure. So it's kind of finding the balance, isn't it, between, obviously, you talked about not overly simplifying things.
Yep.
And obviously the lack of backstory in that situation is what led to such a calamity of PR.
Yeah.
Any questions?
So we do work a lot with data and etc. I really don't like appendices, but is that the only alternative to not throwing data around a lot when some of our outputs require?
You don't like moral objection to appendices?
No, I just think then it is without any context and it's horrible, and the only person that would ever want to look in the appendix of something is someone who's only either trying to disprove you.
Yep. So I'm a big fan of appendices, but I'm also a really big fan of notes as well, and notes underneath slides as well as appendices. So 2 things. I have heard the objection to appendices before, so I would produce, rather than 1 set of slides, 2 sets of slides. This is what we found, this is what it means, this is what you should do, and the detailed workings out as a companion. So that may be it's the same thing, just split into 2, but for those with more time, with real interest, or who want to try and disprove my point, you can have this as well. I do a lot of work with a lot of market research companies, a lot of big market research companies, and I work with them to try and encourage them to use fewer slides. If you're doing, so for example, between friends, now if you're doing a quarterly or a monthly or doesn't matter what the period is, reputation check, these variables move slowly. Maybe they'll move more quickly at the moment, but they tend to move very slowly. And for the sake of completeness, those in corporate reputation practices and the big market research companies, what they will want to do is to show you exactly the movement of everything, even if nothing's happened. Now, one of the problems they're faced with is that they say, we do this every month, every quarter, for Google or Shell or whoever it may be, and we need, for the sake of completeness and for the fee that they're paying us, to show them the whole story. Google, I don't know if you work with Google or you have worked with Google, but they have a rule that you need to have one summary. You can have all the appendices you want or all the companion documents you want, but they want either a one-page Word document or a single slide that has the 3 things that they should know about the piece of work that you have done. And then you can kind of justify that and back that up. So I would strongly encourage the use of appendices or separating them into 2 documents, and you can make the appendix or the detailed data, you make it much more attractive so that people can get lost in it if you want to. But I really, that simplification thing I think is very important. It's definitely in PowerPoint or Keynote. So. I was working with another market research company, slightly smaller one, really innovative, clever. They do brilliant things. If they were showing me their case studies. I was working with them to create their case studies, and they'd done this work on mobile banking. So who would you talk to? What type of ethnography would you do? So of course they'd spoken to people who were high net worth, who didn't use cash anymore, but they also spoke to homeless people who didn't have a smartphone, didn't have any money, to find out what, if they were to change their life circumstances, what would attract them to use. So they're really smart. They do lots of neuro stuff, interesting. And their case studies were literally unpresentable. They were 400 words per slide because they told the entire narrative. And they were put over a sort of smoked filter with a brand logo or a piece of the campaign. And I said, okay, the challenge for you guys is that we are going to create case studies that will be in no less than 32 point on your slide, so you can't have 400 words. And also, they're going to be less than a complete sentence. And the formula for your case studies is going to be doing something for this company with this outcome. And it's going to be doing something, it's going to be a verbal noun, changing perceptions or shifting, whatever it might be, because that gives you a sense of continuous. And then we can't possibly do that. We've got to have all of these words because, we know the stories, but our younger teams don't necessarily. I said, just put them in the notes. Because when they're on the train to Ealing or wherever they're going, they will look at the notes and they'll be able to stand up and tell you the story. Don't worry about that. And we took slides that were literally unpresentable, that had clients and prospects, great fans of this research agency, playing, doodle jump on their phone within 2 slides because they were awful. They were also clashing colours, which didn't help. But so think about using notes as well. So what you want. So in this quest to avoid the backstory yawn, you want people to say, "I'm not sure I agree with you." I mean, you don't necessarily want to stimulate that always, but you want people to say, "That's really interesting. How did you work that out? How did you come to that? Take me through your workings out," rather than taking them through the workings out and they fall asleep, would be my argument. Hope that helps.
How do you balance then trying to educate the person that you are delivering that piece of data, so getting them to understand the industry or what you're doing better? Because a way of doing it is talking them through your work and how you got to it.
Sure, absolutely.
So how do you balance that with giving them the headline and the action?
Intriguing them enough to get them to answer it. Maybe that sounds circular. I do a lot of training in data storytelling, and one of the exercises I get people to do totally cold before showing them any pictures of prime ministers or buses is to get them to do a bit of homework beforehand and to research a client or their own company or a favourite sports team, whoever it might be. Bring some data with them, and then I'll get them to write a short elevator barbecue cocktail party pitch using numbers. I want to get a feeling about the individuals and the group, how they're naturalistically using numbers to write the beginning of a pitch, the first 2 minutes of a presentation or the first paragraph of a report, to see how they use them. They have no structure apart from you can do 3 or 4 sentences, you can do 50 to 80 words. People often do very much more. And they think that, it's a silly trick really on my part. They think it's an exercise. How many numbers can we get in? Most people do. Those who've thought about it a bit more think, that's interesting, maybe I should just choose one or two. But they will throw stuff at you. So they'll be talking about Netflix, say. Netflix is, people always use Netflix, easy one to do. And they will say, it's got this many countries, this many subscribers, this much revenue. And then they'll suddenly tell you all about the fact they don't have any working hours or because their HR is quite interesting in Netflix. They don't have any official working hours. You can take as much holiday as you want. They'll just throw all of this stuff at you. And I think one of a former boss, one of my favourite lines of a former boss, the definition of a great strategy is what you choose not to do, just as much as what you choose to do. And for me, the definition of a great, intriguing data story that gets people captivated is the numbers you choose to use versus the numbers that you choose either to put in the appendix or below the fold or in a separate document. That you've absolutely got your workings out. But if you're able to do that, this is what the numbers tell us, and we can summarize that in a single number or a few numbers or a chart. This is how things are trending over time. This is your opportunity, whatever it may be. And then get them to say, tell me, you're shaking my world a bit here. Isn't that what our competitors do? Isn't that, you want there to be enough uncertainty in what you first present them with to engage in a dialogue, and then you can drown them in numbers because they're ready to lap them up. Would be my approach.
How do you structure or how do you approach a long engagement on monthly reports covering the same data points month after month after month, where there is no real new story to tell each time?
That's a really hard one. That is a hard one, and that's the. Sure. So how would I approach a regular monthly or quarterly report where there's no real news, no real change? So working with the market research businesses that do this corporate reputation tracking, that's something that I come across time and time again and say, but we've got to have these slides in here. One, because the client's expecting them, and two, because if we don't and nothing's changed, it's going to be a very short meeting. And my argument to them is, so you've got to have something, clearly, and it may just be status quo, it's fine, but you need to keep an eye on this because when these things do shift. It might be that you think, well, I've done that for 2 months in a row now. They're going to stop seeing the value in me if I say that things haven't changed. But actually, you're being judged on your ability to analyse what's happening with the data rather than what's happening with it. You're not responsible for their reputation. You're responsible for what's happening in the data. Without suggesting that you go on a fishing expedition, because that's not something to do, really where things move slowly, really pay attention to outliers. You might say, yeah, but there's never any outliers in this market. In which case, I think maybe is there a kind of a program of continuous education that you can develop so that when for your clients about the way that reputation metrics move slowly or the way that they can be used to predict commercial value of a business. Are there modules of intelligence, of thought leadership that you may well have published on your website 3 years ago that you can bring in to say, look, there's nothing new to tell you here, but we'd like to use this time to, I'm not trying to create a different business model, but outliers would be one, and is there other value that you can give, whilst at the same time saying, do you know what, this is, it really hasn't changed. You get 2,741 positive sentiment tweets every quarter and it just has not changed. People still love you just as much as ever. But it really is hard. Outliers can be really, really interesting. They can be massively diverting. They can be complete chase down a rabbit hole. But I have nothing better than that, I'm afraid.
But sometimes, just to build on this, I think sometimes the status quo is actually a good outcome. Because you could also look at what else has happened within the industry or the competitive set that could have degraded that score, and sometimes staying flat despite of the world going mad can actually be a good thing.
Yeah, if you were able,
perspective.
If you were able to go to an airline client next month with some things haven't changed news, you'd be doing an amazing job. Yeah, it's a very good point. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well on that note then, just a quick one about lunch and learn. If anyone has some good ideas they'd like to communicate in a simplified manner for the rest of the company, then don't hesitate to get in touch with either Andy and the Lunch and Learn team, who are going to be made more apparent on the forthcoming wiki launch, which we hope to be very soon. If the wiki is still relevant, we're hoping it will be. It is, and he's confirming. So yeah, so that's it guys. Thanks very much for your time, and thanks again to Sam, it's been brilliant.
Thank you very much.